Today we're closing 3 major gaps in my LEGO city. First of all, starting with a small bay. After much consideration, I decided to build it using a wooden pier instead of the beach I was always talking about. I first of all prepared the pier and then modeled the entire rockwork and cliffs around it. As you can imagine, this was quite time-consuming and annoying work, but after having the cliffs done, I still needed to do the most important thing by far, which is of course camouflaging the border between the two modules. I did that once again using vegetation, which by the way also has the added benefit of adding color contrast. The curved wooden pathway at this point still wasn't enough for me, and I decided to add these extensions. The way I built them, just like the rest of the pier, was by using brick modifieds turned on the sides, and the reason I was using brick modifieds is because I had this little gap remaining in between the wooden slats, resulting in the perfect spacing if you ask me. The entire thing is then connected to the rest of the pier using one single brick modified. Because of the spacing, obviously I can't add a second one, but this is more than enough to hold everything in place. I also decided to add a second extension as well as experiment with this T-shape at the end, but then finally decided against that because it looked a bit weird. One final thing we have to do is of course add these wooden beams with the printed flat tiles on top. I absolutely love this little piece. You can see me use that throughout the entire city, and in this case of course it adds so much detail, and in combination with a few minifigures, one surfer right here as well as one guy going swimming, this now sums up this area, and we can move on to the second gap of today's video we have to close, which is, as you know by now, the spot for the future kiosk. And first of all, when I'm starting the tiling right now, you can see me avoid adding any sort of studs. And this is because I'll add the kiosk at an angle. And I'm not only adding it at an angle, but also adding angles to the kiosk itself. I decided to build it out of this hexagonal shape, which of course made the roof a bit more difficult, but also interesting because I was adding these two different types of triangles that now can be simply folded down towards the center of the kiosk and then form this rounded roof. I of course have little small tiny gaps remaining, which I'll try to get rid of as soon as I'll add lighting. Another thing I was then experimenting with is how exactly I want to finish off the roof on top, and as you can see right there, I was initially experimenting with the top of my lighthouse, but of course that didn't fit, and therefore I decided to add this sort of weird double disc, I don't know what I should call this thing, which then simply rests on 3 of these triangles of the roof. Of course, what is still missing is the interior, and now I decided to simply build the interior on the tiling itself and then put the entire kiosk on top. For the outside, I wanted to add these postcard stands, which in this case I once again used brick modifieds for, and then simply placed all different sort of postcards and newspapers and so on top. And then, if the weather is nice outside and there isn't too much wind going on, many kiosks simply place these things outside, and it adds awesome detail if you ask me. Especially in combination with the rest I'm doing right now. I decided to add one more tree in the center right there because I thought it was still a bit too empty at this point. And then of course minifigures in front to tell little stories, and this then brings this entire section to life. Which leaves us with the third and final gap for today's video. And for that we jump towards this row of houses, which we finally continue. And let's start with the interior. I think as soon as I'm adding this first little detail right there, you can immediately guess what I'm doing. I'm of course adding a small pizzeria with this little oven right there, a pizza inside, then the desk in front, a cook standing behind the desk. And since there isn't too much space in the interior, let's quickly finish off the facade, and then afterwards we can continue on the outside where the main sitting area is going to be for the pizzeria. Right there I'm just quickly finishing off the brickwork along the edges, and as you can see I also added a functioning door, as for every single other building as well I'm adding. And now it's time to add the building to the city. There you can see how important this dark red of the facade is, because it simply adds a new color tone to this area where red was completely missing up to this point. Of course, I also started adding details to the second floor as well. In fact, I even managed to add a small toilet right there in the corner. You can see that's quite rare with my buildings because of the space. And now, as I announced just a minute ago, it's time for the exterior sitting place. First of all, the tiling has to be done, and now I had these left from the assembly square, I think it was. 2 chairs and 1 desk on each side of the door, 2 guys sitting there, and of course, the most important thing, a waiter delivering pizza. And now I was simply working on little details right there. For example, I needed to somehow separate the sitting area from the tram line because of the proximity to it. But I'll come back to this area at the end once again, because now we have to go back to the beginning of today's video where I was modeling these cliffs around the small pier. One thing I thought was missing is something to connect the C modules down there with the rest of the city, and I decided a little tree right there on top was the perfect solution, and therefore I normally normally wouldn't show you this, but this is what goes into building one single tree. First of all, you have to prepare these little balls of leaves, I call them, and then this is then the more fun part. It's time to design the tree itself, adding these brown arches and so on. But the point I'm getting to is, in total, every single tree takes me about 30 to 40 minutes depending on the size, sometimes even an hour. And as I'm just finishing up this little tree and I'm satisfied with the overall shape, it's time to add the tree and find the perfect size of tree for this little spot. I decided to add the bigger tree of the two I built in this case, then added the trunk of the tree into the rock face itself, and now the tree itself on top. And this really rounds off this area and of course also gives a bit of shade down at the little bay where our inhabitants are taking a swim. What I of course had to take into consideration when planting the tree is if the tram can still pass by. And if we take a look, I actually got extremely lucky because at the beginning I didn't have that in mind, but it's just barely able to pass by. And now this is probably my all-time favorite perspective of the entire Lego City, if the train disappears in that corridor in between the kiosk, the two trees, and then this row of houses. And on the other side, of course, where there's still the empty studs remaining at the moment, this is then where the entire city is going to be extended, making this perspective look even more incredible and more interesting. Right in front, this is the part where I'm still not quite satisfied with at the moment, especially at this empty rock face. I definitely want to add a bit more vegetation, but not only vegetation, but also life and action, probably tell a few stories, because that's where this area still misses something in my opinion. Then before I come back to the city, something else you guys seem to be more interested in is how exactly I order my pieces. And now at the moment when the Lego factory is opened, I buy the majority of bricks from the factory itself, which is about a 2-hour drive away from me. So it's time you can invest, especially there you can see it if you buy these large quantities of bricks. In total, this order in this case cost me about 3,500 euros, including the voucher. And by the way, there you can see this is my new record of a receipt. There it is. And now when it comes to storing and organizing everything, I thought I'll quickly show you how exactly I've extended my wall of sorted Lego pieces. Finally, these last remaining drawers I needed for my wall have arrived. And of course, extending the entire wall for the sorted Lego pieces, it was time to fill everything up. By the way, what I normally do when I buy Lego pieces is I take one of these drawers and then exactly measure the amount of pieces I want to buy, so everything is nicely filled up. And there you can see what the end result looks like. Since these drawers of course aren't too big, I decided to only store plates as well as other smaller brick modifieds and so on in this corner, and for larger bricks I simply use these boxes. With that, it's absolutely time to get back to the Lego City. When it comes to today's building progress, first of all, the kiosk right here, I of course have to fix these little gaps in between the roof because of the lighting I'm going to add. And this of course is quite important. Up here you can see there's no stairs leading up into this room, which means I'll have to connect that building to the one right next to it, and then this is one giant floor basically. And then that of course means that we're going to continue this row of houses towards the future bridge, which is a project I'm really looking forward to. Right here I'm thinking about adding a basketball court maybe, and then another building right here in front that somehow belongs to the harbor. And then, as I'm talking about the harbor, I think I'm going to add maybe a cliff diver right here along with some more vegetation. But this is the area I'm still most concerned about when it comes to this front section. And that now leads me to today's before and after picture. This is what it looked like before today's update, with these two gaps on the left and on the right of the lighthouse. And this is what it looks afterwards. Absolutely love closing these gaps. And with that being said, that's it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.